A new level of ambition and excellence thrives at the Texas Tech System. A $2 billion higher education enterprise with 4 diverse and distinguished universities. Because from here, it's possible.
Whether we're talking about new ways to move cargo from one end of Texas to the other, or drafting new trade agreements to create jobs in the Lone Star State, there are conversations to be had. That's why IBC Bank is proud to partner with the Texas Tribune.
Hey there, how you doing? All right, I'm just checking one note here, and we're gonna go from there. All right, everybody, what a turnout! And the floodwaters are receding too, so that's the other good news. Thank you all for being here. We got a great crowd. And I hope everybody can hear pretty well. I think this mic is working. I'm Steve Kornacki with MSNBC and NBC News, and thank you. This is the official MSNBC tent, and we are going to be talking for the next hour, and we're going to give you a chance as well to talk with something that you almost never see anymore in Washington and in politics. We have a real live human Democrat and a real live human Republican who are working together. And specifically on the issue of immigration, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the work they're doing there, parts of the country they represent, and just the general climate in Washington, then whatever is on your mind. So let me introduce both of them right now. We have with us a Republican from Texas, from the 23rd District, not too far from here. His name is Will Hurd. Bring him up. And I promised you a Democrat. We have one, too, from the 31st District of California, the Inland Empire, Democrat Pete Aguilar. There you go. Welcome.
I always feel like that's like the start of a joke, right? A Republican from Texas and a Democrat from California.
This is the new a priest and a rabbi walk into a bar, right? We got.
Welcome to Between Two Ferns.
So they started with a handshake, which is, and they're smiling. Right. They're dressed similarly too. I'm just realizing.
If you only knew.
Let me start on this. It's a big picture question. You guys are working together on immigration, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I think what everybody here probably was watching this week, certainly what I was watching, was what was happening in the Senate and the Senate Judiciary Committee this week. And two things just about watching that drama jumped out at me. Number one was that until about, it looked like about 12:30 in the afternoon yesterday, you had 21 members of a committee who had been confronted with the same people testifying. Very emotional testimony from two different people. And it just so happened that the 11 people who were on one side saw it this way, and the 10 people on the other side saw it another way. And I'm just curious, it did change yesterday, I say about 12:30, because one of the Republicans, Jeff Flake, made an alliance with some of the Democrats, with Chris Coons most notably. So I want to talk about, I guess my question to you is, did you read what happened yesterday at 12:30 with Jeff Flake and Chris Coons? Is that a hopeful moment that portends something more, or is that just the exception to Washington?
Well, it's not the exception. And what I would say, and this is a stat, I truly ask if one of y'all know this answer, let me know after this. Hey, Jordan. And because I've asked this a bunch of times. 854 bills have passed the House. This is like as of end of August. How many of those were bipartisan? The answer is all but 11, right? So 843. Nobody knows that, whether you watch MSNBC or Fox News. And so yes, there's no question we are in a hyper-partisan environment, and this week has shown that. But there's actually a lot of things that are getting done. Now, there's some big issues that haven't, and so I'm not trying to paint this overly rosy picture. However, more gets done than what people realize. It's just not above the fold in the newspaper, and it's not on the networks that most people watch. And this kind of engagement that Pete and I have had, it's two people that didn't know each other before we engaged on this topic, that have gotten to know each other because we respect each other's opinion. Both of us understand the issue to a nuanced level. And so I think this kind of engagement I think the opportunity to have more of this in the future actually does exist.
I think just real briefly, I think what that showed, what the Chris Coons, the readout of the Coons and Flake little discussion, I think that happens all the time. I think what this did is this kind of magnified that, because we huddle all the time as members and have conversations and say, well, what about this? Or do you think you guys could do this or do that? And that's part of the success that we had on this issue. But I think what was so interesting is just the stakes were so high, the 11 to 10, as you mentioned, and so that really kind of compounded the discussion. But those conversations happen all the time in both houses. Members discussing, saying, well, what if you did this, or if your side did this, could we do that together? That happens more than people know, like Will said.
And a guy like Chris Coons, who we engaged with on immigration, with John McCain, may he rest in peace. You know, these were the conversations that Pete and I were having, you know, during this debate around immigration. So you have that kind of huddling happening across the House.
Because it was a striking thing in People of Peace, the video together of this afterwards. Maybe you saw it yesterday. Jeff Flake was sitting on the Republican side of the panel. He was offered a chance just before this vote was supposed to take place. He was offered a chance to speak. He said he didn't want to speak, and he got up, walked across the room, and he just tapped Chris Coons on the shoulder. And Coons knew what he was, and they both got up and they left. And that is apparently when this deal happened. So, Congressman Aguilar is saying this happens all the time. Take us through the roots of your relationship. Who reached out to who? How did it happen? How did this start happening?
Well, it started with a bipartisan policy committee report written by Henry Cisneros and Michael Chertoff, senior former official, Democrat, senior former official, Republican. I was born and raised in San Antonio, represent part of San Antonio, so I know former Secretary Hurd Cisneros and former Mayor Cisneros well. And it outlined what I thought was the way we can ultimately solve immigration in a narrow fashion. And I knew that if you want to get anything immigration done in a bipartisan way, you have to have the Congressional Hispanic Caucus as a key driver, because the policy knowledge was within that organization, and the folks there are who everybody looks to for guidance and direction on these types of issues. And so I approached Michelle Lujan Grisham. And then Michelle in the conversation said, Pete Aguilar is the guy that we should be having. And so Pete and I, we knew each other, but we weren't close. And that began like, hey, what do you think about this as a broad framework in order to actually move people forward? And so that was the first contact and first conversation.
I think, but like any relationship, it takes time to get to know each other, to trust each other. You know, similar to dating, I suppose. I've been out of the game for a long time, Will. But I asked Beto O'Rourke. I said, hey, Beto, Will reached out to Michelle and I to talk about immigration. Like, what do you think? And Beto said, yeah, like you guys should get in a room and you should talk about this. And so because they had their little famous, you know, road trip.
Oh, that's right, right.
And so I knew that he spent, you know, dozens of hours with Will.
29 hours, to be exact.
And so
sounds memorable.
I called in, but I was like the late show. I called in at like 2 a.m. During theirs. So just like any relationship, right? It's like, hey, can I trust this person? Can I work with them? What are your thoughts? What do you think? And Beto said, yeah, you guys need to meet. So then we started meeting. We started huddling. We had the bipartisan, you know, policy document that Will mentioned, and we started with the frame. And I think this is the most important thing. We started with the frame that we all believed that a solution was possible, and that we could find a way, and that Democrats and Republicans, despite all of our differences, we could probably find enough to get this done, if given the opportunity. And so that was the frame at which we had the conversations of, you know, how do we talk about what is a DACA fix with border security? And how much could we go in both directions in order to make that balance right?
Well, so I want to go through what you've put together, what you've proposed, but also I want to get into the obstacles that you've faced and what that tells us, because it's basically a year now since the Trump administration started to say it plans to rescind DACA. Of course, we had that big showdown, I think, back at the end of January, early February last year. And here we are a year later, everything is still sort of in limbo. So first, what is the fix here? What is it you guys have put together? What is it you want to do?
Smart wall, which is use technology, manpower in order to gain operational control of our border. And you have to do a mile-by-mile assessment of the border because, look, I represent more border than any member of Congress, 820 miles. There's roughly 2,000 miles of border, and every mile is different, and there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all solution. And building a 30-foot-high concrete structure from sea to shining sea is the most expensive and least effective way to do border security. So, yeah, we can. So, technology, manpower, tactics, right? One. DACA fix, roughly 1 million plus, right? Young men and women who have only known the United States of America as their home, permanent legislative fix for them. Third piece is increased immigration judges. Because guess what? If people are in violation of the law, they should go through a trial. And you need more immigration judges. You reduce the backlog, and you have people in our custody for a lot less longer. And fourth, address root causes. What is the things that are driving illegal immigration from the Northern Triangle, which is Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, and El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, those three, and address those root causes, and let's do this thing called the Millennium Cooperation Challenge. So those are the four tenets. Now, we've had conversations about other things that we could add to this in order to get more, in order to increase our vote count, but that's roughly the four pillars.
And what's the buy-in? What's the vote count you have right now for this? If
this bill was on the House floor, it would get 240 to 250 votes. I feel strongly about that.
How does that break down among the two parties? What do you think?
We would get every Democrat on that bill.
So you're talking a couple dozen Republicans?
Yeah, we'd get a couple dozen Republicans. Now, this became the basis for a parliamentary tactic. This is so incredibly wonky, I'm sorry to bore you, called a discharge petition. Because Republicans would not give us floor time to do this, we thought, and we
Republican leadership.
Republican leadership. We wanted to expand this discussion, and so we included a couple others. So Jeff Denham and a few others started playing a role, and so we created a process to have a parliamentary procedure. We needed 218 signatures on a piece of paper in order to push that forward. And so we ended up becoming a couple short, but that would have forced a debate and discussion that would have given Republican leadership an immigration proposal to vote on. It would have given Democrats the DREAM Act to vote on. And it would have given us an opportunity to vote on this bill. So, and we knew that this would have been the bill that would have succeeded and passed and gone on to the Senate.
So let's get into the obstacles then. What Democratic votes are there, your vote's there, some other Republican. What's the biggest roadblock for Republicans?
The biggest roadblock is being able to get something scheduled, right? And so that's why, and the original idea was another parliamentary trick called the Queen of the Hill. It's you bring those four bills that Pete just talked about to the floor, everybody gets to vote on it, whichever gets the most votes over 218 goes on to the Senate. In order to force that and that was designed by Jeff Denham, and then Carlos Curbelo had the discharge petition, which is to force a vote. We needed 28 Republicans to sign on to a discharge by a certain date because it's an arcane parliamentary tool. And we were 2 votes shy from that.
So what's the obstacle to getting, I say get those 2 more, but to get a lot more than those 2 more? When you
so I think
look within your...
That's also the funny thing is we had difficulty getting those 2 additional votes, even though we knew if it would have come up, we would have had 20 more people vote for it. So in essence, members of Congress were coming up to us and saying, hey, if you guys pull this off, I'm with you and I'm going to vote for your bill. Yeah. But I'm not going to sign my name because I don't want to get the wrath of Republican leadership or my constituents for being a leader on this issue.
That's the question. What is that getting to?
Let's talk about, okay, look, who are the problems? There is part of my side that no matter what, under any circumstances, believes you should increase immigration. Period, end of story. Now, I think they're completely wrong, okay? And we have benefited from the brain drain and the hard-working drain of every other country for the last couple of decades. Let's continue that. So there's a group that just, no matter what, They only want to see a decrease in immigration. And I think that's crazy. Now at 3.8% unemployment, that means every industry needs people, from agriculture to artificial intelligence. So we need more folks. So that's one piece.
How big do you think that group is on your side?
More than a dozen. Then on the other side, you have folks that no matter what will not give this administration any victory on something like this. They're just not going to happen, so you have to discount that. So you have to work with the majority of the people that are in the middle, and some are worried about political blowback or ramifications for doing something, right? And some it's like, oh, you believe in amnesty. Or the other side, it's, you know, you're militarizing the border, right? So these are some of the issues that you have to deal with, but at the end of the day, there's over 1 million kids, young men and women, excuse me, I shouldn't say kids, young men and women that have contributed to our economy, that are contributing to our culture, that have only known this place, have gone to our high schools, they're Americans. Let's make sure they don't have any more uncertainty and codify that. And it's 2018, we haven't secured our border, and we should.
We should also mention that this was a path to citizenship for these individuals. So this would create, so you had, if you went to school or had a certificate program or vocational training, that was one path. If you worked full-time and there was a criteria for that, that was another path. If you served in the military, that was the third path. So those would allow you to become LPR, lawful permanent residency systems. And then you're treated like any other LPR. So you could spend, it's a 5-year window to become a naturalized U.S. citizen once you were in that category. So our bill put them on a path. But I want to be clear, because there were other proposals that would have said, well, we're going to have another, we're going to keep you in another permanent, another, you know, status. And we weren't interested in a second and third class for these individuals. We wanted to ensure that they had all the rights and responsibilities and obligations that a normal LPR would have, including becoming a U.S. citizen should they choose to. Not all of them choose to. And many in Texas and in California, green card holders, LPR holders, choose not to. And that is fine. But they should have an opportunity to. And so that's what we agreed to, and we drew the line around that. Having a path to citizenship was important for us, and that was important for the individuals who were co-sponsoring the bill.
And Steve, another barrier is just other members actually understanding current law. Pete's laughing because this was an education process. And the reason, what I loved about being able to work with Pete is that he understands the nuance. Like, he understands that if you do X, then Y is going to potentially happen. Or you know, one of the biggest problems you have in Congress is, you know, nobody knows, okay, if I have 1 apple, what is that worth? I don't know how many oranges it's worth, but it's probably not 20, right? And so people that have this disconnect. So educating current members on what the current rules are under immigration there was a complete lack of understanding. Like let's take DACA. Not everybody can be considered DACA or DACA eligible. If you have committed a crime, you cannot be a DACA eligible person, right? And so there's this misconception out there that, oh, we're going to be making all these people that have committed crimes eligible. No, you cannot be in that program if you have committed a crime. And our colleagues did not necessarily understand that. So there was an education process that was a barrier to getting people comfortable with some of these ideas.
Don't assume that every member of Congress reads all these pieces of legislation. And what we found is, and this is a critique of the institution of Congress, it's very centralized, right? The leadership offices control a lot of the talent and the intellectual knowledge. And so if a leadership office sends out talking points on a piece of legislation that is critical and negative, that guides the discussion one way. If they do it that's positive, it guides the discussion another way. So because not every member, and now Will and I could, until we're blue in the face, say, hey, look, you know, Article 2, Section 8, line 42, this does not say that. And they're like, well, that's the leadership office said that. And so that is a difficulty in a highly centralized Congress, making sure that our staff and our colleagues' staff have the time and the bandwidth to dig in on these issues is a concern long term.
Is there a sense in Congress, you are all ultimately representatives of the people in your district, 500,000 or so, a little bit more than that. in every district is there an apprehension that none of us maybe fully grasp what the politics of immigration are, broadly speaking? And I ask it from this standpoint. When I look at the polling numbers, I'm struck by a few things. DACA, the idea of protection for DACA folks, overwhelmingly popular when you just poll that conceptually.
75% of Republicans actually support
broad support
a permanent legislative fix for DACA.
And then I'm thinking of this summer when there was the issue of the child separation policy at the border. Poisonously unpopular when you polled that, including among Republicans. But then I remember we had a poll about the situation at the border this summer, and it said, do you approve of the child separation policy? 75, 80% said no. Okay, what should be done with these families at the border? The number one option was get the parent and child together and deport them. The number two option was get the parent and child together and hold them together, awaiting legal action. And I was struck by this because what the Trump administration was doing is poisonously unpopular, but what the most common argument you heard from the Democratic side in terms of what to do was send them in the United States, have some method for tracking and awaiting legal, and yet the most popular polling response to it was something pretty hard line. And it just made me wonder, boy, this is one of these complex things where people can think multiple things at the same time.
Well, and because it's tough to capture, because there's also rules and court cases that guide this, right? So what you're also talking about is the Flores settlement, which says you can't hold a child longer than 20 days. And so that's what was so difficult about this situation for us is as this was developing and Republican leadership put their proposal forward, they said, oh, we fixed family separation too. Well, their fix was we're going to indefinitely detain children in violation of the Flores Agreement, which says you have 20 days. So that's what the public doesn't understand and some of our colleagues in leadership offices don't understand. And so what we tried talking about was, look, what's successful? What can be measured? What can we do? How do you use data to make these decisions? There's a case management program that the Trump administration defunded that had a 98% success rate. So individuals who claim lawful asylum, right? There are individuals who cross illegally, and then there are individuals who cross at a port of entry and claim asylum. You're allowed to claim asylum at a port of entry or not. I mean, so all these rules govern this, and there's a case management program which is effective that tracks individuals and makes them show up to their court hearing and provides them all the resources to do that. So those are the things that are working. Let's make sure that we're doing the things that are working and cut out all the nonsense.
Sorry, Pete. I'm taking.
Oh,
I was doing a video.
Are you on Snapchat there?
Yeah, sorry. I was listening.
It's only
Pete.
slightly awkward.
No.
Let me ask you about the.
Well, can
go
I
ahead.
can I add on what Pete said? First off, ripping a child from their mother or father, if you have to do that, then you need to rethink your strategy, right? Plain and simple. And the technical fixes to these problems are easy. Streamline immigration. It's 2018. We should be able to have a market-based system. And as I said before, with where the economy is, you need employees, and there are people that we can fill some of these jobs across the entire spectrum. So streamline that. We know what the root causes are of causing people from places like the Northern Triangle to come to the United States. Lack of economic opportunity. It is also violence. Violence by criminal gangs, violence by drug trafficking organizations, and violence against women. So it's the husband beating the wife and the kids, right? So when you address those root causes, you actually see a decrease in people coming from those communities. I was recently in Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, and you look at some of the things that USAID and State Department are doing. That's why part of our solution was this Millennium Challenge entity to help address those root causes, because you see a market decrease, right? So this is not something that's going to be solved overnight, but we have to get through some of the politics and how people weaponize both sides. I also think people want to use this issue as the latest litmus test on, are you soft on crime, And so we got to get through the politics, because the solutions are actually quite straightforward.
What I'm curious about is this, and we ask about obstacles. I'll talk about your party in particular. I got a question about the Democrats after, but on the Republican side, I'm thinking of the atmosphere nationally in the Republican Party after the 2012 election, when Mitt Romney lost to Barack Obama. And the Republican National Committee commissioned what they called the autopsy report on the 2012 election. And one of the areas of emphasis for what they thought the Republicans needed to do going forward was change the tone and change the direction on immigration. And I even remember, I swear to God this happened, the week after the 2012 election, Sean Hannity went on the air on Fox News and said, I've rethought it, and I want some kind of comprehensive immigration reform. He wanted to take some action on immigration reform.
I need to get that clip.
And then, yeah, it's out there. 4 years later, Donald Trump rises through the Republican primaries, swamps the field, becomes president. That change from where the Republicans were trying to recover from 2012 to seeing Donald Trump run and win on the message he had in 2016, how has that affected your ability to work within your party on this?
Well, so yes, you have that, but you also have Carlos Curbelo. You also have Will Hurd, right? And when I got elected in 2014, folks in your profession, I had about 400 of y'all ask me a version of this question. How'd a black dude win in a Latino district, right? And my dad's black, my mom's white, my district is 71% Latino. And the fact that, you know, I can function and do things that nobody thought I was going to be able to do is the example. And I say here in Texas, if the Republican Party in Texas doesn't start looking like Texas, we're not going to have a Republican Party in Texas, right? And so I think the principles and theories and the lessons learned from that autopsy are still germane to this day. And I've seen them in my own district, in the 29 counties I represent. You can say, you know, folks like Carlos Curbelo is doing that. And I even think a guy like Jeff Denham as well. So there are those examples of where we need to go. But guess what? The Republican Party is just bigger than Donald Trump. And yes, he has the biggest megaphone. Yes, he's the titular leader of the party, but there's more of us, and it's broader ideology. And a lot of times, those of us that may differ, people don't see that or don't acknowledge that. And like I said, on this particular issue, there's a lot more Republicans that are willing to vote for this than most people know. We just got to get something to the floor, and that's what we hope to do in December.
Yeah. And in terms of the Democratic side of this, the changing politics that I'm noticing, and I'm curious if you're noticing this and what you make of it, it seems to me in response to the rise of Trump and where the immigration debate broadly has gone in this country, there has been energy to move the Democratic Party to the left when it comes to the issue of immigration. And particularly, it's the movement to abolish ICE, immigrations and customs. What do you make of that movement? What do you make of what you're seeing in the Democratic Party? Do you sense that the energy in the grassroots of your party is to go left?
I think that there are very public examples of individuals who have chosen to make that a platform for what they want to discuss. And I think that's fine. The Democratic Party is a big tent. There's a lot of energy. There's a lot of ideas. And I think it is fine. I think that particular proposal is not fair, not accurate, not realistic, and will never happen. So let's spend time talking about the changes, because at its root cause, I don't think Democrats, even some of those Democrats, actually oppose, you know, drug trafficking and a lot of the work that ICE actually does. What they oppose are the policies that this president has put forward that have tried to weaponize a government agency. And so I think that's what we need to get to the root of. That's how we can solve this issue. Let's fix the policies. Let's win the House back, and then let's put forward some policies and rein in some of the discussions that the president would like to have related to the activities of those agencies. I passed a DACA amendment in the House Appropriations, Committee, and so there are ways we can do this where we say you will not spend any funds doing this policy or that policy, or mine was you will not spend any funds deporting any individual with DACA status. So that currently meets DACA status. So those are things we can do, and I look forward to having those next steps. But I will give you that there are very public examples of those individuals. But this was a member-driven effort. This was members like Will and I, and on the Democratic caucus, the Hispanic caucus, saying, look, we're a little uneasy talking about border security. We still don't like talking about border security in exchange for DACA, right? We don't think that DACA necessarily, I heard this from a lot of members, necessitated having a discussion about border security, because the implication is these individuals are unsafe. And we don't buy into that. And I get that. I understand that. But what I would tell these individuals is, these members, my colleagues, tell me how we fix this before January of 2021. What's your idea? When we don't control the Senate, we don't control the House, we don't control who's at 1600 Pennsylvania. So once we laid out the case and the policy framework, then individuals, even those who were reluctant initially, came on board.
Does it make it, as a Democrat, trying to reach across the aisle and work with Republicans, does it make it tougher, the fact that Donald Trump is the president?
No, because our colleagues are our colleagues. I think it gives us a lot more opportunities, and I think what our Republicans colleagues say when they're Jeff Flake tapping people on the shoulders and saying, hey, you got a minute, when what they tell us in the hallways and in the cloakrooms and hanging out leads me to think that they don't always love these policies either. I can work with that. Now, Will mentioned Carlos Curbelo, Jeff Denham. All right, that's 3. You know, my challenge to Will and to all of us is, all right, let's go find 10 more. And then after that, let's go find 10 more. And let's find 10 more that aren't retiring because they feel that they can do this now. So those are the things that give me, but look, I want to work and I want to make Congress work. And so I'm comfortable having a conversation. Just put me in the game, coach. Let me know, put me on the field. Let me have a conversation with my colleagues. I feel I can have the policy in front of me and the coalition around me to make something successful.
And Steve, I'll add what Pete says. When you look at the newer members of Congress, there is actually a bias towards action. And many of us had previous careers before, and so the idea is let's solve problems and let's sit down and put our heads together and try to find some of these solutions. And you see that on both sides of the aisle. And I think that group of people is actually growing.
I'm curious too, in particular, your political situation. I think everybody here from Texas knows, anybody following politics knows it. You're in a tough re-election race. You're in a swing district. Your district voted for, you want to give them a donation?
Why am I helping you?
I'm in a tough race.
You're a Republican in a district that voted for Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
And does that, there are 25 districts like that, Republicans in your shoes, but there are 435 House members total. And the vast majority of those House members are not in what we'd classify as swing districts. How would Congress change if more members were in the situation you're in?
Oh, I actually think that's the solution long term, where the debate is actually in November, not in a primary. Here in Texas, that's March. And so I always joke and say I'm the only Republican that has to talk to Democrats. And when you are in Texas, when you have to represent everybody, and I always say this, I represent the big towns, San Antonio, 1.3 million people, 7th largest city in the country, and Mentone, population 19, which doesn't make it the smallest city in Texas, by the way. It's 4th smallest. And then I represent people that voted for me and didn't vote for me. And so I think I actually, people reward that independence. People reward being willing to work with people and actually standing up to your own party. And I've learned, be honest, tell people what you're doing and why you're doing it. They're not always going to agree. And so I believe, so I think it was, you should know this based on your book,
which is available in stores.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. It came out October 2nd, right?
That's right. It's Tuesday.
I think the number of 15 years ago, the number of swing districts, like right now it's 23 or 25.
Yeah.
15 years ago, I think that number was in the 50s.
Yeah, you're in the 90s in that. Yeah.
And then you go 10 years before that, it was like in the hundreds. And so when you look at this uber partisanship, right, and you look at when primaries decide who the candidate's going to be in November, you roughly have 2 or 3% of the entire district making the decision. And the more people you have making the decision, the better off we are. And that's why I love the district that I represent. And I like the fact that it's always, when Troy Balderson won a couple of weeks ago now.
Special election out in Ohio.
Yeah, special election in Ohio. Everybody was like, he won, it was a narrow, razor-thin margin. He only won by 8,000 votes. I was like, man, that's a landslide, Because I won my first election by 1,500 votes. And so I think it changes the kind of people that can win and can go to Washington, and you get more problem solving.
Well, and that's a really interesting point, because we have somebody here from the only state in the country, one of the only states, I should say, Congressman, California has this system put in place in 2012 that's sort of what Congressman Hurd is describing here, where everybody runs together in the primary in June. and the top two, regardless of party, advance to the general election. That could be two Democrats, it could be two Republicans. And the idea when they put this in place in California was this is going to mean the candidates go towards the center, towards the middle in the general election. You've lived under this system. Has it done anything?
Yeah, I think it's kind of failed miserably because people haven't. So what California did was twofold, right? So you have the top two primary, we call the jungle primary, so the top two advance. But we also had an independent citizens redistricting committee that drew the seats. I would argue that that had more success than the top two. Because what happens with the top two, and the data bears this out, is when two Democrats are running against each other in a district, conventional wisdom, academics, would say, oh, well, Republicans are just going to vote for the more moderate one, right? Like, it makes sense, I get that. What has happened is a Republican looks at their ballot and says, two Democrats, pass. I'll vote for this, I'll skip this, and then I'll vote for school board and city council. So the data shows that there are more people undervoting in those elections, and so I think that that's wrong. So I still prefer the closed primary system. However, with independent redistricting, so like you said, we had 7 districts in California that are Republican held but voted for Clinton. We also, by the way, had 5 endangered Democrats pre-Trump. We had 5 endangered Democrats who were always living at the tip of the spear throughout California. So you had a balance of tough Democratic seats, tough Republican seats, a bunch in the middle, some safe on either side. That's, I think, the solution. Independent redistricting, take it out of the hands of the state legislatures and the governors, do it independently. I think that's the solution to making our politics more rational.
And I was, look, Pete and I, we are friends, right? And I respect this guy, I trust this guy, I look up to this guy. But we disagree on a lot, but we're able to have a conversation and we trust one another. And so that competition of ideas actually has gotten us to the final document, our act, the bill, the USA Act, because we have had a conversation back and forth, and it is not 100% what I would have wanted, it's not 100% what he would have wanted, but we were able to have that debate and that conversation and then bring various elements of our respective caucuses together.
I want to open it up here in a second to questions, comments from the audience, but let me ask you this, just the experience of working together on immigration, has it stirred conversations where you found other common ground? Are there other issues where you've discovered, hey, maybe there's something we can do beyond this?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, kind of under this kind of frame, maybe this still doesn't answer your question, but right, we started with DACA plus border security. Then you had the Trump administration family separation policy, and we're scratching our heads say, well, how can we fix that? What's language like? What do D's say? What do R's say? How can we find this balance? TPS, when we started, we all thought, well, look, we've got 14 months until this TPS status goes away. Well, guess what? That's now a couple months that individuals start losing their status. So we're going to have to collapse some of these other issues into, hopefully, some discussion that we have to solve these next things. But yeah, look, we may disagree on some broader stuff. We may disagree occasionally on healthcare or on taxes, but there are going to be a bunch of issues that Will and I agree with, and we're happy to work with each other. And I'll tell you, our staffs also, this is super inside DC, our staffs also get along and trust each other and like each other, and that goes a long way when you're working with someone on issues.
Does it help too, it seems to me it's easier than ever to seek out and only be exposed to sort of one view of the world. There's news is arranged almost ideologically, almost tribally now. Having conversation, having relationships across the aisle, even if you don't agree, are there areas where you feel you understand Democrats, where you might understand liberals more than you would have before?
For sure. When you listen and talk, you understand. I know where Pete is coming from. He actually wants to solve problems and help his communities. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. We may approach, we may have different tactics, but we actually want to get to the same destination. And the only way you come to that realization is if you spend time and you work through things and you work on big issues. The thing I've learned crisscrossing the 29 counties I represent, way more unites us than divides us. And if we focus on those kinds of things, we're going to be better off. And people expect us to be able to disagree without being disagreeable. And as I've said a bunch of times, that competition of ideas is what made this little experiment called America work. And we have to do it in a civil way, and we have to sometimes do some things that may be uncomfortable because people want us to have hard elbows and karate chop each other, but you have to push through that in order to solve real problems that are impacting our communities.
All right, we're going to open it up here. While we do, let's just give a round of applause first, though, Congressman Will Hurd, Congressman Pete Aguilar, and so I see a bunch of hands. I believe, if I have this right, the microphone is not working. Is that? Yeah. See if I got the.
Yell it out. And
okay, yeah. So yell it out, and I'll amplify it. So I'll start right here.
Hi, my name's Kasie Hunt. I want to thank you all for what you have done for dreamers this past year. And I was wondering if you can tell us exactly what you're going to do in the next Congress to protect dreamers and further those protections for undocumented immigrants. And how will you prioritize our broken immigration system and fixing that? And how soon in the next Congress will you produce legislation?
Okay, looking for specifics here in the next Congress. Yeah. We got an election coming up. What's it going to do?
I'll go even further. I'll step it back. Not just next Congress, the lame duck. So this tool that we talked about earlier, the discharge. Don't tell anybody, but we have one more day, right? In December, and so working towards, can we get those 28 Republicans we need in order to force this debate? So that's step one, and that is, again, the framework is going to be the USA Act. There's some other elements that we think that we could add to the USA Act to get more Republicans and ultimately not lose Democrats in order to get that vote count beyond that 240 range that we have. So this is not about the 116th Congress. We still have time in the next couple of months to try to bring that solution for the USA Act.
I think, yeah, all I'd say is it depends on what Republican leadership wants to do, right? If Speaker Ryan, who has not been very helpful to us on this effort, I'm saying this, not Will, if he genuinely wanted to clear the deck, which is what John Boehner did, as he was leaving, right? He cleared the deck of did some compromises. So if he truly wanted to clear the deck of issues, we could handle this in the lame duck, right? I don't know if that's what his intent is. If Democrats, what I will tell you is if Democrats take control of the House, this is going to be something that we work on in December and in January and in February, and we will have legislative text to solve this for just like our bill with Will, DACA plus DACA eligible, those individuals. I think that's the type of coalition. My suggestion would be that we keep it to that right now, and we build bipartisan consensus and a group that can then have other conversations about more comprehensive immigration reform.
And the only way we make this permanent, the only way we make it permanent is if we do it together.
Yep.
And so all these solutions have to be done with us working together so that it survives regardless of administrations or who controls the House.
All right, let's get it. I'm going to go to make sure I get one from the edges here. Go ahead, sir.
Very simple question. Why aren't more Republicans like you?
Sounds like most heard it, but
Tall, dark, and handsome?
let me just repeat it in case anybody didn't hear.
Hey, I'll show you the text message. I tell him that all the time.
He said, Congressman Will Hurd, why aren't more Republicans like you?
Thank you for the comment. I do appreciate that. And look, I spent 9.5 years as an undercover officer in the CIA, and it was a way to serve my country and work on some of the most exciting issues of the day. And I look at my time in Congress as an extension of that service. And for me, I'm doing this to try to help people. And I think I'm not worried about keeping the job, because I think if I do my job, then people will reward me. And I will say this: there are a lot of folks that care. Scott Taylor, Elise Stefanik, Mike Gallagher. I can name Mac Thornberry. Right? There are more than what get credit for. But thank you.
All right, let's get a. Yeah, we go ahead and I'll go over here after.
You mentioned that you just need a few more votes in order in December for the constituents to help that move along.
So yeah, he's asking what can be done, I think, from a citizen, from an activist standpoint, to help with progress on reaching some kind of solution?
Look, I think the ultimate way we have success, especially on the DACA issue, is you have to help share your stories. You know, you have to magnify those. You have to use social media to get that out. You have to try to get in front of it. Not every member of Congress, right, is gonna take the meeting, but we have to continue to try to get you in front of your members of Congress to share your stories. Yeah, no, I think it's a fair concern. I mean, the Trump administration created this and that's what spurred the conversation by ending DACA. They forced us, but there was always going to be a move afoot legislatively to fix this. And so it just hypercharged that effort. But sharing those stories is the most powerful thing we can do to talking about this issue and talking about finding a solution. So we enlisted, look, we had, Will and I aren't going to tell you all the tactics we employed in our whip effort, but I'll tell you the Catholic...
It's time to go, Pete, sorry.
The Catholic Bishops Association was great. They reached out and talked to members of Congress. So when you have your local bishop call you and say, hey, you know, our association has taken a position in support of this bill. We think you should too. When you get stories like anyone in the community saying, this is my story about how I didn't even know I was undocumented until I got to high school and started applying for college. These are real life stories, and more members of Congress need to hear them, because the only way we fix this, like Will said, is if we actually take action.
And they need to hear it from the person that lives in their district, right? And so when they think DACA, they have that person's face or that influence. And ultimately, the judicial system has exacerbated this problem as well, and that's why there needs to be a permanent legislative fix so it lives beyond any administration and cannot be challenged in courts.
Let's get one from, I just want to make sure to get one from this side. Anybody over here? Well, all right, we'll start back here.
So Steve mentioned about how kind of you have this tribalism and news media, and so how do you kind of work through that and work across the aisle when you have the Fox News and CNN and stuff like that, who might not say the friendliest things about you?
Media tribalism, how do you navigate it?
Read your book, right? I hope that's part of it.
You're a great politician.
Is that part of it? No, look.
Buttering up the moderator never hurts.
Never fails.
Look, it's not everybody, right? What's portrayed on TV does not represent everybody. And sometimes you gotta take your message, was that a cheers or a jeer? Yeah. So you can't let that cloud. And it starts with having strong members. And I know somebody yelled out, the USA Act, you can figure out who the co-sponsors and that are on the USA Act. Honestly, if you just Google USA Act and Aguilar and Hurd, you know, some of that stuff would pop up, and you'll see who's on it, and then you also see who's not on it, and then try to educate those folks on, you know, changing their opinions. And when they think of DACA, they think of that super sharp kid, you know, that is starting a business or getting ready to cure cancer or something like that.
So I think all I'd add is I think part of this is some of the media, you know, needs to get out of their box and having the same people on, right? Because creating that conflict. There's a bunch of us who don't always accept every media request, and maybe that's why. But we get along with each other. We have conversations with each other all the time. And on the House floor, that's the only time I have each week that isn't budgeted. But I can go over and hang out. I know where the California Republicans sit. I always know where Will's at. He'll shoot me a text that says Marco, and I got to say Polo and go find him. And so we know how to find each other in committees, in those behind the closed doors where we can just have these conversations. We need to do more of that. There are less opportunities for us now in these Congresses, and more members are living at home. I commute back and forth to California every week, so we're spending less time with each other, which is an issue. I'm not going to change because I'm going to see my kids, but I will tell you that the place does work a little different because we all can fly in. We shouldn't. We all can fly in, do our jobs, throw some grenades and bombs around, and then fly back home. And that doesn't help. Sticking around, traveling with one another, building relationships, that works.
Look, I'm in D.C. 3 nights a week, And then 2 weekends a month, I fly in and out of San Antonio, 1 week in Midland, 1 week in El Paso, and hit those parts of the district, right? And so those are some of the times that probably 10, 15 years ago, there were some more member-to-member connections that were going on to ensure that you can have, you know, those relationships across the aisle.
We got time for one more question here. Right back there. Go ahead.
The question is about fear, about the policy proposal, the public charge that the administration is advancing forward. Look, people come to this country for opportunity, and the idea that we would try to penalize a U.S.-born citizen from going to Head Start or benefiting from the SNAP program because they have this split status family where someone in their household is undocumented and that could be used against them, that is just wrong. To penalize anytime you're trying to say, no, we don't want help and assistance to go to that young child, you've already lost, in my opinion, from a policy standpoint. So we've got to fix this. We can make these changes, but we've got to have the space to do it. I think where the administration is going on this is very, very wrong and very dangerous. They're trying to, again, foment some deep fear among folks. And they're also trying to reduce individuals saying, well, look, I may know someone who's undocumented, but I better not come anywhere near those programs, even if I do have status, because I don't want the Trump administration coming after me. And I think that's very accurate, and many people feel that way. And so only Congress can fix this. Our job is to legislate. I look forward to doing that.
Yeah, and look, we are a co-equal branch of government, and one of the quickest ways for Congress to change that kind of behavior in the executive branch is using the appropriations process. And Pete alluded to that earlier. You can't use funds for certain things. You zero out budgets here. You know, that's the lever and the counterbalance that we have. And there's going to be a lot of that conversation in the lame duck when we were looking at the Department of Homeland Security budget.
All right, with that, I'm going to thank again Congressman Will Hurd, Republican from Texas, Congressman Pete Aguilar, Democrat from California. Thank you both. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.